what I'd first like to do is there's always going to be some people that don't know who you are, right? So in whatever words you'd like to, who is Chris Cappy? And first of all, did I pronounce that right? I think you're going to understand that pronunciation is not my strong suit.
It's also, I basically get every foreign name wrong of any place that I talk about. I just butcher it completely. So I'm not even certain that I can say. That's what I say. I go by Chris Cappy because I basically can't pronounce my own last name. It's Cappoluto or Cappoluto. I've been told that it means tiny hat in Italian, which is a little bit Yeah, it's a little bit humiliating. That's what my name. It doesn't mean like usually your.
I'm not laughing with you. I'm laughing at you.
Yes,
I mean, I'm not. You know what I mean.
I'm laughing at me as well. But Chris Cappy is your average infantryman, just your regular grunt. He's trying to make sense of some of the world's most complicated conflicts that are happening. And I grew up on Long Island or in Long Island, whichever way you want to call it. And I wouldn't say I had like a sheltered upbringing, but I was very fortunate. I was very lucky, I feel like. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to join the military, is because I felt as though this country gave me a lot of opportunities. And whether you're for the war on terror or not, I felt as though because the United States of America gave me so much, I owed something in return. And when they made the call, when America said, we need bodies, I wanted to answer that. So it was my kind of way of giving back, because when I joined, I was going to school. I was going to art school for film. And my days were going to class and learning about a camera. And so one day I'm doing that, and I'm like, it didn't feel fulfilling. I felt like there was a giant void in my life. And there was a part of me just a part of you that knows that you're not the person you're supposed to be. And I knew that I lacked discipline. I knew that I was soft. I'm soft again now that I've been out.
I was just going to ask how you feel now. Do you still feel soft?
No, but my point kind of is that Chris Cappy, who I am, is somebody who wanted to be challenged in life and didn't want to take that easy road of just going to film school, getting out, and not doing anything in my life that I felt like I could be proud of. So I dropped out of film school. I was in New York City art school in Manhattan, and I dropped out and joined the Army National Guard Infantry. And when I got back from boot camp,
when was that? When
2008 was when I enlisted, and okay. I was in my dorm room, and I was like not to make things political, but like I grew up very conservative, so I was very for the war in Iraq when it was happening. And I remember I'm surrounded by all these art kids who are totally against it. Yeah. And we're doing like one of those Edward Scissorhands 40s nights, and we're just pounding 40s. And I'm the drunk kid that's saying like, yeah, we should be in Iraq. We're doing the right thing. Like, it's not about oil. And some kid just calls me on my bullshit and is like, if you really think that, why don't you enlist? You should be over there fighting. And I was like, no, that's stupid. But then, like, I don't know if you've ever had that moment where someone calls you on your bullshit and you know it.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of take like a really hard look in the mirror and look at myself and ask myself, like, what are my convictions? What do I really believe? And if I'm saying that I'm for the war in Iraq, and if I truly think that I believe this, like, shouldn't I be there? You know, that no one likes being a hypocrite. And I think usually the immediate thing to do in that moment is to lie to yourself and to cope and to make up an excuse as to why, like, they're full of shit. Can I curse?
Well, it's too late now.
Damn it.
Watch your damn mouth.
So
I don't care.
So I really had to ask myself who I was in that moment. And that was when I decided to go to a recruiter. Was when that guy, who I still remember his name, he was a German foreign exchange student here. And I owe a lot to him.
What's his name?
I can't. Well, I won't say. I guess I could say his first. No, I can't even say his first name. Someone looks him up. But he was a good guy. But in that moment, I hated him. So that, I guess, would be like my origin story.
Yeah. And so how long were you in the military?
I did a 3-year contract,
Okay.
which was stupid because by doing 3 years, I missed out on a $20,000 bonus, which would have been sweet in hindsight. But I wanted to do 3 because I was so certain that I was going to hate the Army. I was like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going. And I 4 years when you're 18 years old, 19 years old, that's how old I was, is a very long time. So I didn't want to make that commitment. I could barely even stay with a girl for that long. So did 3-year contract, and then I got out for 2 years, and then I did another 2-year contract. So in total, I was in 5.
You had a 2-year gap in service there.
Right.
Did you deploy your first contract or that second one?
First contract. As soon as I got back from boot camp, and
Oh, wow.
there's these like transitions that you have as a National Guardsman where it's kind of very stark. Where 1 second I'm in boot camp and I'm folding my underwear really perfectly into little squares and rolling them up and doing the ranger roll with them, and everything is disciplined, toe to line. You got to be perfect. And then imagine switching from that to then the next day you're at art school again. And so I'm back in a dorm with these,
Please tell me you were wearing your tan T-shirt and you had your combat boots on in class.
And I'm like, why is everyone being so chill? No, I had like a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I did, because it's hard to transition between the two, and it's hard to respect how other people are different, and why is everyone being so relaxed? And it felt like I was in a foreign world, and it felt uncomfortable. So weird that when I was in boot camp, when I first got there, it was same things. Huge transition from you're drinking 40s one night to then suddenly you have no control over your life and you're being treated terribly. So once I got back to art school, I made the decision that I was like, I need to deploy right away, because that's the whole point of why I enlisted. I wanted to deploy. That felt like, okay, I'm doing my part. I'll come home and that'll be it. So in the National Guard, you can volunteer to deploy, which is a little different than active duty. So what I did was I found the first National Guard unit that was leaving for Iraq, and I went to my captain and I said, can you sign off on my transfer papers so that I can transfer to that Pennsylvania National Guard unit so that I can deploy with them? And the guy looked at me and he's like, you're insane. Like, why would you want to go over there? We're not deploying for like 2 years. We're not supposed to go again. You could just chill here, And I was like, no, please sign this so that I can go. I said, okay, you're stupid, but all right. So they signed it for me, and then I switched over to the Pennsylvania 56th Stryker Brigade out of the 28th ID.
Yeah, so a lot of that is very, very familiar for me. My entire career has been reserve, so that what you're describing on that, feeling out of place is almost like this, and I don't know if this is the right word, but microcosm, or this small example of, what the challenges are when people transition out of the service, right? Just going from basic training back into regular life, where you've spent basic training in AIT, or did you do OSET?
OSET.
Yeah. So going from that 12, 13 weeks worth of training to right back into academia, which is just an entirely different animal of its own, is like this small example of what somebody that does 20 years in active duty and then is trying to transition into civilian life. So I think there's still a piece to that continues to be an issue, and I think it's a contributor from a community perspective of people not feeling like they belong outside of the military anymore. And you can see that at kind of multiple levels. You know what I mean? You hear the stories all the time, and this is something that I actually kind of wanted to talk to you about. Stories of, ultimately veteran suicide, right? Which is just a topic that can't be discussed enough, but stories of people that, really are struggling still to find their way. The veteran community specifically at Funker530 is kind of here to hopefully provide some of that community feel back. We do that through the archiving of combat footage, depends on how you look at it. But when exactly did you deploy? I kind of got long-winded on that. That's a topic that I am always thinking about, though.
Dude, I would be great to pick your brain on, mental health of veterans. Could talk about that all day. Definitely think it's a really important topic. I personally, so when I deployed 2009, which was kind of a weird point in the Iraq War. It was not the
immediately. It's like immediately post 07, 08 surge.
Right after the surge, right? So it's kind of like the cleanup crew. It's we're not there during the Fallujah 04. It's the really epitome of occupation. This is occupation mission. And so a lot of my missions are going out, handing out hundreds of thousands of dollars to local sheikh leaders.
In bag money?
Bag money.
Just bag money.
We're just paying them off. Like, hey, take this money. By the way, don't bomb us.
Yeah.
Like, we cool? We cool? Okay. So that was a bunch of the missions of that. Then we're also doing raids on objectives, finding if we get intel that there's the bomb maker. We're also doing presence patrols, which is like waste time. We're doing guard duty as well. So I'm on like a small COP, which we call the JSS, Joint Security Station, which was about the size of a football field just north of Baghdad in Mushada. And there's about 100 American soldiers and about 100 Iraqi army and police on the other half of the base, if that makes sense.
It does.
So there's about 6 guard towers surrounding it, and it's T-walls and 1 hot meal a day and 1 shower a week. And then you rotate after a month. You go back to Camp Taji for about, I think it was the 3-day rotation, and then back a month at the COP or the JSS. And so, yeah, it was... I saw enough of war, I think, to have an appreciation for how terrible it is. I remember the first time I saw somebody killed in action was it was an IED strike right outside the base, and it shook the whole base. And then I see one of our sergeants is dragging in an Iraqi police officer, and his brains are just coming out the back of his head. And I remember thinking, it's like a weird thought that you have. I'm like, that's more pink than I thought it would be. And it falls on the ground. And we had 2 local dogs on our COP they would go out on patrol with us, and they were these really great dogs. But they come over and they start eating up the brains off the ground. And I was just in shock in that moment, because I had no point of reference for that. It was very early in the tour. I'm 19 years old. I'm the youngest guy in the entire company, and it's difficult to process. And the way I process it, and the way I think a lot of guys process things like that, is with humor and just trying to kind of
as a coping mechanism, if you will.
Exactly, to joke about it, and because if you don't, that's the rational thing to do, is to joke about it. And the rational thing would be to just want to leave, to make an excuse to go back home. The irrational thing to do is to stay there and joke about it. So that's kind of how I dealt with seeing the violence that I saw over there.
Do you think that the general public? So this is actually going to touch on something that we cover quite a bit here. That reality that you talk about, it being kind of beyond the expectations of what the horror that you've always heard about is. It's even worse, than you might think if you've not been there. Do you think that that the transparency that the public has into the realities of war, given the lenses that we have into it now, war in 4K, if you will, do you think that is a positive or a negative? Generally speaking, and I know it's not that simple of a question.
I think there's no surrogate for experiencing it, and I think that even what I experienced isn't really it, because I saw other people get killed that weren't... We had 1 American soldier in my company got killed. That's awful. When I saw... This is terrible to admit, but when I saw Iraqi police and army getting killed every week, and I got to be honest with you, when I saw that, it's terrible, but I didn't really feel that much. And maybe I'm not using the right words, but that was my experience then when I was 19 and seeing Iraqi police and army die didn't affect me And I feel like if it was my family, if I was an Iraqi and my father or brother or someone was killed, that's really experiencing war at its like most visceral and awful level. And it's impossible to communicate that, I think,
That's
through.
what I was going to help describe, is it's difficult to articulate that unless you understand that and have seen that, right? A lot of people we have the ability to look back at things with hindsight, that old adage, hindsight is 20/20. And you can also look at it, you can armchair general it after the fact, right? So somebody could look at that almost soundbite perspective and say, oh, he didn't care about the Iraqi police and all this stuff. It's difficult to articulate that the way your brain processes one of your own being killed is very different than it processing, somebody from a partner force, right? So where did that ultimately lead to you doing what you do now? How do we get to here, where we are today?
The transition for me so when I got back from Iraq, I tried going straight back to school, and it just didn't work great because it was one of those situations where 1 month I'm in the sand, and then 2 months later I'm trying to go back to school. So I took a little bit of time off. It was maybe half a year when I got back, and that's almost worse because now you don't have the mission, you're not around your buddies, you're not training, you're not doing anything, not in school, and it's just, so you fill the time with like drinking a lot and drugs and just self-destructive behavior and maybe a little bit of survivor's guilt in there. So I didn't handle it very well. And but since then, it's just been a kind of me climbing a ladder back towards like getting my shit together. And so when I first got back, and then I transferred from where I was going at SVA to NYU in Manhattan, a Tisch School of Film, which I had been rejected from in the past. But after they, I think, saw that I always say I was like a diversity acceptance for NYU, because they didn't really have any soldiers applying there. So I think that's probably why they accepted me, and went back, finished college there, studied everything I could about how to story tell, basically, how to tell stories in an effective way. And from NYU, that I was very lucky. I got the opportunity to work at The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, where I was a production assistant. First, I was an intern, unpaid intern, earning nothing, just for the opportunity, just for the chance to go there and get coffee for people, and just to see how they put a giant production like that together, and how do you coordinate between the graphics people and the editing people and the talent, and how do you put that all together to tell one unified vision? Like, how do you cooperate on that scale to churn out a product daily? Like, what do you have to what compromises do you have to make to kind of get it out the door, but still check the quality of it? And what level of work does Jon Stewart himself put into the script versus how much of it is his writers?
What level of work does Jon Stewart put into the script?
Holy hell, the dude so politics aside, like whether I agree, I disagree, I happen to disagree with most of what he would say, but on a personal level, I love the dude because he's amazing for veterans, first of all. Also, really, he believes what he's saying, and he's coming from a genuine place. And he's the first person there every morning at 8 a.m, and he's the last to leave at 8 p.m. And he's rewriting the script and making sure that it's something that he would actually say. And has his hands in everything, knows the lowest level PA's name he was an amazing boss, I would say. And I learned a lot from him, even though I was just there in a menial position. I still was able to observe how they kind of put it all together. And I used a lot of that information in how I tried to run and put together the show that we do at TMP. But so I was working there for about 2 years, and then I left to go work in corporate America in something that I really enjoy, which is marketing and talking about how do you communicate a message effectively. And so I was working in the tech industry, and how do you communicate around new technologies that are coming out in artificial intelligence and in tech. And that was also an important piece for me, to learn how to kind of condense information in a very sort of like layman term. I would go to the subject matter experts, the dudes that are really, they understand the zeros and ones, and then communicate their level of understanding to someone like me who has no background in that.
Yeah, how do you distill that information to make it human understandable, right?
Exactly.
Somebody, a lay person's understanding, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like it would be obvious. It seems like that'd be an easy thing to do, but there's a lot that goes into figuring out how to communicate that effectively. So I worked at IBM and at Cisco for the next, I think it was like maybe 5 years inside corporate America. And as much as I loved that opportunity and what I learned there, I still felt like there was a part of me that it wasn't fulfilling, because I felt like I wanted to be telling stories that were more about things that I care about. And I love technology, but really I'm passionate about the military and politics and geopolitics. And so when I saw there was an opportunity opening up at Task and Purpose, I was like, this is perfect. I can combine what I kind of know about the military and what I kind of know about technology and engineering and communicating those things, put it together. And it just seemed like it could be a really good fit.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's always drawn me to the stuff that you put out is it distills very broad and very complex topics into something that's understandable, and there is enough variance in what you cover that you've typically touched on something that I might have interest in, and I think there's a lot of value with that, right? I think there's a lot. Another old, adage or saying is a jack of all trades, but not many people know that that's only part of it, right? A jack of all trades, a jack of many trades, but master of none is oftentimes better than a master of one, is actually the full saying, right? And based on our conversations that we've had so far today, I think, we kind of approach how we cover things that way, trying to be able to just distill things for people. And I think that's important. One of the things that you've been most, vocal about, though, and most people are, given just its gravity in the rest of the world, is the war in Ukraine, right? February 24th, 2022, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I'm not sure how much you can share, but I know that there are projects that you have ongoing and coming up that are going to even deepen your understanding, first and foremost, and your ability to relay information. When it comes to the questions that I had for you surrounding that, though, they have more to do with the polarization of the topic, I think. Because I think we've each dealt with this for or against mentality. I wanted to get your opinion on that. It's not a question. This is a discussion, right? This podcast is always meant to be a discussion. I don't have a list of questions for you. We have some topics. Do you see a lot of the polarization, the for or against, the way that we do here at Funker?
It's interesting to see how it's evolved over the past, over 2 years now, where I remember when I first started covering it, you got the sense that there's so many comments just, pro-Ukraine, supportive of Ukraine. And then over the years, you start to see the comments change, and you can kind of get a sense for the sentiment of the public and what people are thinking, and when they are getting sort of war fatigued, and when they are feeling like, let's wrap this thing up. And you can, I think, get a bit of a sense for every day that the war goes on. It seems like there's kind of chipping away at that support. And I'm seeing more and more people that I wouldn't even say are necessarily pro-Russian. I do sometimes, in my worst moments, I'll see all that feedback and people calling me like a shill for Ukraine, and it can be easy to hand wave it off and to write it off and just dismiss it as, well, they're Russian bots. But I think it's a little bit more, that's not really engaging with what's going on totally, because I think I can imagine a world where there are people who have different opinions, and they're not necessarily paid to have those opinions. They just genuinely hold them. And there are, I think, a growing number of people who are frustrated with the war and want it to end. And that's what I'm seeing in terms of it's not as universal, the support for Ukraine anymore.
I don't think it ever truly was, in a sense, universal. I think that you're right, there is a shift. And one of the things I always try to look at is what surrounds that shift. Like what is happening in the world right now that is kind of contributing to public sentiment about a topic. My career was in intelligence, and towards the tail end of at least my deployments was information operations, right? So the cognitive space is always one that interests me. And I got a softball of a question one night of, why do you think it is such a polarizing topic? And that itself is such a broad answer. It actually took me about 20 minutes distilling, my thoughts on that. And I think that unfortunately we live in an age where there's more information available than people know what to do with. So what ends up happening is you go to research a topic and end up with just your first nugget of confirmation bias, and then you kind of stop because the amount of information that's available to you, which is double-edged sword, is so numerous and so dense that getting a real true nuance down, or at least for somebody that doesn't have much time, they've got a 9 to 5, they've got, they don't have all day to spend on social media to review both perspectives. They're going to be reliant on social media's algorithm to show them things, which is going to reinforce their echo chambers. And I don't think people have the time to dedicate against the complexity of these topics, but from a certain lens, the organizations that they used to depend on for this information have continued to kind of erode from, in my opinion, the truth when it comes to our media. I think that our media, they don't call it spin room for nothing. We were talking about that earlier. And I think war is such a complex topic that it can make it, especially with Ukraine, it's polarized and politicized more than it should be. You and I were talking about the border, for example, and some of the attention on Ukraine is soured because there are things that, in my opinion, this is an opinion, and I don't consider it to be political, there are things that our administration in the United States currently aren't doing to solve what I would consider to be a border crisis. And people are saying that is because that we are focused on other, things happen from a foreign policy perspective. It's difficult for me to internalize why we can't look at each of those problem sets as, their own. And we have to look at them as mutually exclusive, if that makes sense.
It's a false dilemma, a little bit, but at the same time, they have a point. I understand that. The way I look at like foreign aid and us sending weapons and any kind of aid, I look at it, whether it's Ukraine or Germany, wherever, it's a little bit like health insurance in the United States. Yeah. You gotta pay it. It sucks to pay it. You'd rather spend that money on something else, but if you don't, you might regret it a couple of years from now if you don't pay that insurance. And the United States benefits from sending that aid. But I also think the way it gets complicated is it would be disingenuous to pretend like if the United States didn't have to shoulder all that burden, we would be able to invest more in America. That's also true. Yeah. So the genuine disagreement there is like, to what degree or should we send aid?
And it depends on the lens that you're looking at it in. Right, we were talking about that. Yeah, where your personal moral compass and principles lie. Right, I think there are still so many people, though, that aren't necessarily Ukraine supporters, that are still generally supportive of Ukraine's success. And I think that it's that complexity that you talked about, that we must be able to do more than focus on one topic, that people align, a lot of that, or at least, set aside a lot of that support in because of, like you said, an insurance policy.
Well, let me tell you something that is going to, I think, if you're a Ukraine supporter, probably make you uncomfortable, is, for instance, the United States has had multiple CIA bases inside of Ukraine. And the CIA themselves released a ton of information to the New York Times on this. Did a whole, long article outlining how since after 2014, after the invasion of Crimea, the CIA went in, set up shop, started training the Ukrainian intelligence to basically counter the Russian intelligence units. And they said, hey, don't use this to kill Russians. And then the Ukrainians, of course, they feel like, hey, we're defending our country. So they went and they killed Russians with CIA training. And this is all in the New York Times article. And so you could make the argument that from Russia's perspective, they're feeling like, hey, there are these CIA bases that are killing our soldiers, who then, if you want to go even further back, you can say, well, what's Russia doing in Ukraine at that point? It's funding separatist movements. So these things, you can just keep following them. You pull on the thread, and then next thing you know, you're listening to Putin talk about how, well, in 1800...
No, it was 800.
Right,
Rurik.
Sorry.
In 800, and that was its own ball of wax. But dependent upon, to your point, dependent upon which of those things, as you peel back the onion, you can choose any one of those things, which has a foundation in truth, and you can base an argument on that, right? I think, again, as people search for this justification for why they should feel one way or another, I think the underlying sentiment that I always try and express is the problem is not as binary as that. The challenge of the war, the size and scope of that's occurring in Ukraine has reverberations across the globe. It's not that it's 2,000 miles away, if not more, forgive the numbers there, but it's not that it's over there and has no impact. The world is too small now. There are shadow wars that are happening all over the globe between nation states that we ourselves are involved in, that Russia is still actively doing, and that they will continue to do. If we are not playing on that global scale, then we are behind, and we can be surrounded, whether it be militarily, politically, or economically, especially if we bury our heads in the sand and internalize as a nation.
I think you're talking about if we were to go full isolationist, if we were to just put the brakes on. I mean, I think that America is a little bit of an empire at this point. It's tough to say that it's not. It's neo-imperialism, but what we're doing. And if we were to fully close off and to isolate, I think there's an argument to be made that when an empire collapses, and if our currency were no longer used as the standard, this would not be good for us back home. But the way I look at what's happening in Ukraine is that both sides see it as an existential threat. So it's not so much about, from the way I look at it anyway, it's not so much about who's right or wrong or moral or ethically correct. It's just, to me, boils down to, if Russia takes Ukraine, then it's going to be tremendously better future for them as a country. Certainly. And their children, right? Because what it comes down to in the end of the day is what legacy do you leave behind for? Are your children going to lead better lives and be in a better situation? And I think it's hard to argue that, if Russia takes Ukraine, then they certainly will be in a better position, and their families will be in a better position. And from Ukrainians' point of view, they look at what has happened to Poland and all the other countries that have benefited from working with the West, and they look at that and they say, no, thank you. I'm not going to partner with Russia. We're going to partner with the West. Mm-hmm. And from Russia's perspective, that they can't have that. So it's kind of I'm going to say this wrong, but it's like the impenetrable wall, and meets an immovable force, it's like there's
An unstoppable object meeting.
Sorry. Yeah. So what's going to happen? That equation was set up such that both sides are fighting for the future of their country, and whether they will be in an advantageous position. I think that explains why you can see both sides feeling like, yeah, it's worth losing 500,000 people for this, because the stakes are so high.
Sure.
And when you look at our adversaries, what are they doing? They all don't have any problem. They have no qualms with sending aid to Russia.
Right.
There isn't a big debate going on about, hey, should we help out Russia? No, they feel like it's very, very important to them as well and their futures, because they feel like if they can challenge the U.S.-led order and humiliate the United States there, or to better position Russia, this is just my personal belief, but I feel like China is providing some level of aid, not lethal aid, but you certainly see that North Korea is sending artillery shells, Iran is sending rockets. So Russia's allies have no problem seeing the benefit of supporting Russia. We see more disagreement in the West, and I think that's a good thing. I think that it's good that we have these debates and that we talk about it and that we don't just full on head launch into another what we did in Iraq. But yeah, that to me is the interesting thing that people cannot seem to see, is that, look at what our adversaries are doing, and they all see that it's important.
You talked about morality. I've said before, morality is subjective when it comes to war. It depends on, again, who you are, what information you're operating off of. If you are the Russian that's on the ground that just, saw a video get put out of a drone drop on a dude that blew his legs off, right? You're going to be looking at the next time you encounter a Ukrainian a little bit differently than you are us sitting back here at home, seeing an execution video. There were 2 just released very recently, one on the Pokrovsk front, and I don't recall exactly where the second one was, just this week, of, Russians executing Ukrainians. I think on the whole, the way I've always looked at stuff like that is people are always surprised to see, atrocities in war. And I think that one of the reasons that, at least we work to actively help people understand war is that atrocities in war should not surprise you. They should be surprising to watch, but they will happen because war is the ultimate affront that you can have against another person or against another state, right? It is justified murder, ultimately, is what it's going to be, and it's nasty. Especially, you got precision munitions introduced into trench warfare, right? You're supposed to be safe in that trench, and then you have a drone that can be flown into a nose hair, right? That's horrifying to think about.
Well, can I ask you a question? So you watch and you see this archive of combat footage just going back years and years now. Mm-hmm. What do you think of the tone of it? Has it changed? Because I think we have a very sterile idea of war, and then this war in Ukraine, what we're seeing out of it is unlike anything we've seen before.
I have a few opposite opinions that almost contradict each other on that, actually. So I think the lens has never been clearer for the public, and they are seeing some glimpses of the reality of what, our parents and grandparents told us about the horror of war. People just turning into, forgive the language here, pink mist standing next to them, right? They're starting to see glimpses of that, those things that we understood as always being a possibility for us when we were in the global war on terror. But even the global war on terror was a different animal than what we're seeing now, right? You're having entire missions taken away by robot birds. The long-range surveillance mission, no longer a human. It's a human behind a screen flying a bird that has a PG-7 strapped to it. So on the one hand, I think the public is finally really getting exposed to what war does. And then I think, almost from an opposite perspective, that it's over-normalizing it, right? So we see this reality, which is nasty, which is horrible, which, you can use all these placative terms for, it's bad. But I think that there is a careful balance that even we, as the archive, have to continuously contend with by not normalizing it. I can tell you that there is a very much a shift, especially when it comes to drone drop footage online, where it's been gamified by people that have no real ties to the war outside of watching it from afar. You know, the jokes surrounding it, the, you know, LOL, you know, he ain't walking anywhere and no more type of stuff. It's actually one of the bones I've always had to pick with NAFO from day one, right? Somebody asked, how do you feel about NAFO? And I said, I feel like they gamify it too much. They meme it a little bit too much, right? Yes, it's serious. And again, you can be generally supportive of, you know, in this specific instance, Ukraine's success without losing your humanity, you know. I think there's a normalization of it. And that's one of the reasons that I asked a question of you earlier, which was along the lines of normalization. And do you think the lens that we have into war is a good thing or a bad thing? Again, we are an archive. We function specifically to provide a lens into it. And there are things that we still won't publish on the site. You know, we're not live leak. But yeah, I look at this from many different angles every night, every day.
I still think there's a huge benefit to the videos. There is a tendency when you look at the people, the subset of people who are commenting perhaps are not representative of the wider demographic of people who watch the videos. That's probably like the most extreme maybe is some of those people. But the benefit that I always get out of the videos personally is I'll go and I'll look at the analysis that you guys have written on each video. And some of the writers you have just do an incredible job of explaining what you're seeing.
Yeah.
And that to me is a huge value and extremely important. Every day I learn something on there.
That's how we balance it.
Right.
That's what makes us different.
That's what's I feel like is very important because, well, I guess there's really easy to get misunderstandings, and there's also a lot of misinformation that goes around, and people will think A happened, but really you'll go and you read you guys' like expert analysis of people who have been there and know what's going on, and they'll point out something that even though we're all looking at the same video, I wouldn't have seen that. Right. I wouldn't necessarily have picked that out, but you guys are experts at looking and seeing those things. It's a huge benefit because otherwise there's you'll see all these on Twitter or wherever people will say, oh, this is what happened. And then it's not really that.
I think it's so unfortunate that I do, you know, our videos and stuff because I don't think Josh, Will, Cam, Cole, Scott, Funker himself, I don't think that Funker530 as an archive and as a platform that I am ever going to be able to do justice to them, the work that they do to keep the context around these videos. I am here ultimately to help digest it, to help you ingest and digest it, right? They are here to show it to you, right? And it's that context that's provided. You're speaking quite specifically to our mission and how we balance it. What makes us different from, you know, a gore site, if you will, is you have, you know, Purple Heart recipients. You have people that were in Fallujah in 2004 that are doing their best to distill what you're seeing, right? When it's a machine gun video, we've got an Ep.3 31 machine gunner telling you, you know, what enfilade really means. And I absolutely love being a part of this top to bottom. You know, I'm so privileged to be involved with it. I want to shift to something though, because you earlier you mentioned China. I feel like one of the big issues that people have right now is they're seeing all this Russia, and they're right. Russia is a threat, and dependent upon how you look at that threat and whether or not they take over Ukraine and its ultimate impact to, you know, how we live in the United States, that lens specifically is always going to drive your underlying feelings about any war that Russia's involved in. But I do also agree with people when they say that a lot of the conversation is Russia, when we've always had China kind of just sitting there. And to be honest with you, it's not China, China, Taiwan. It's not really a topic that I have spent a lot of time researching from a physical perspective. I was actually a China cyber SME at one time. So from a cyber perspective, I'm actually very familiar with that threat. I know you track a lot of China, Taiwan. Where's the clock at on that? Is China just kind of waiting right now, or?
It's impossible to say when they would invade Taiwan or not, but what we know is that they're stepping up the aggression, or what I would characterize as aggression in the South China Sea, is that they are attacking Filipino ships that are over there. They're taking their water cannons to them. And what's most interesting is they're setting up annual training exercises right outside Taiwan. Every year they do this. I believe it's called Longsword or something, but it's this military exercise where they fire missiles over Taiwan. They set up their navy. They basically pretend to do a blockade of Taiwan every single year. And the thing that really concerns me about that is what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine. What did they do? They did it under the guise of a training exercise.
Even their soldiers were under the impression they were training until they weren't.
Right. And the benefit of that it's that we are going to get normalized by seeing this happen every year, and we're going to be like, China's just doing their training
saber rattling again.
And then one day it's not going to be that.
Yeah.
They're going to go to do their annual training exercise, and then they're going to give the order, no, this is a live fire exercise. We were doing this for real. And they're going to blockade Taiwan, and then they're going to invade it, potentially. The $1 million question is, well, there's two, I guess. There's, what is China's intention? Do they really want to invade Taiwan? And do they have the capability to? And people will give you a million different answers, but the truth is nobody knows. Nobody knows. That's what half the mission of the CIA is, trying to figure out what China's intention is. And half the mission of the defense agencies are trying to figure out what their weapon systems capabilities are and their unit cohesion, and also trying to understand them from a cultural perspective, because it's so different. The way we look at something, a movement that they do, is very different than how they'll perceive it. So I spend a lot of time looking at what are they investing in? How much are they spending in defense? Because there is a discrepancy between our defense budget is very high, but when you look at how China, what do they count as defense spending? Are they really saying the whole picture of how much they're spending on defense? They're kind of a black box. The way that we're transparent with our military spending is very different than how China is. So
transparency is relative. We get the budget reports and things along those lines, but the realignment of funds and
ours is probably much higher than we say it is, but theirs is as well. Yeah. And so it's hard to determine a lot of how they're spending and how much. I think personally that they're on track. They're preparing to invade Taiwan, but
how much should the U.S. care? The U.S. layperson, the me, right? As a generally ignorant.
I think the way I look at it is I look at it from a historical perspective. We've been investing in that part of China since World War II. We sent billions of dollars to the Kuomintang during World War II when they were fighting the Japanese. And our aid was, I would say, instrumental in preventing China from being taken over by Japan during World War II. So our alliance there, our partnership there, goes way back. And so for us to just leave our partners and to abandon our allies would start to unravel what is the alliance that makes America be able to punch above its weight class as a country of 330 million people. The reason we're kind of on top right now is because we have this huge network of alliances of people who want to be our partners, because we're there for our partners in return. So on one level, it's not worth it. It's not worth it getting into a shooting war over Taiwan. But then there's the principle of it. And on that principle level, it's absolutely worth fighting for your allies.
I think another global war is inevitable, right? I'm not one of those people that thinks it's as imminent as tomorrow. I think that there's always a possibility of that, right? There is always a possibility of that. But I do find that a war with Russia and or China is ultimately inevitable based primarily, and if for no other reason, on control, on the power balance, right? You say the U.S. is on top. There are economic things that are being put in place to attempt to take over that top position from an economy perspective. They're the same being stood up from a political perspective. Military is, people are always chasing the United States militarily, right? I think it's ultimately inevitable, and I think that there are things that we are doing to try and be ready for that. You know, like the Army's changing its marksmanship standards to be able to, you know, compete from a different doctrines perspective than what we did before. The new rifle.
Before the new rifle is fascinating, and I love the new rifle. I'll say I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think war isn't necessarily inevitable. I think that we can avoid it. I think the United States and China, for instance, there's also so many reasons to believe that we're going to be able to cooperate because our economies are so intertwined. And we have so many reasons to work together and to figure this out and to find a way to understand that, okay, we don't like that they're authoritarian. We don't like that they're a dictatorship, but we can still find a way to coexist with each other in some way, make a compromise. I think it's possible. I think you're right. They're totally going to want that top position still. And that fight hopefully happens in the hybrid zone instead of in the live fire zone. Because it's unfair on some level that the United States can push certain levers that they can't. Like, we can sanction places into oblivion, and a sanction might as well be a bomb sometimes. It does, in some ways, it can do more damage than bombing a country if you sanction them hard enough and in the right ways. There's also limits to its power, but China and Russia and Iran and North Korea, the world order is not set up in their favor. Economically,
it might not be currently, but that's kind of what I'm getting at here is, regardless of what, you know, political concessions we're making or diplomatic concessions that we're making, they're continuously, you know, shifting and sliding to make it in their favor. And to be honest with you, I am of the mind that the United States, as currently the world's only and remaining superpower, is not in a position to just allow that to happen. You know, so again, when I say that I think there's an eventual shooting war, again, I am not saying that it is even in mine or my child's generation. I am saying that as an eventuality, the power has been shifted to the West for only a very, very short time in known history, right? It was in Asia for the longest time. And to be honest with you, I don't think they've forgotten about that. I think they are continuing, whether it be Russia, China, Iran, North Korea to a certain perspective, you know, your big four, if you will. I think that they are continuing to find ways to place themselves into a military, economic, or political advantage over the United States. And I think that there will be a point that the United States has essentially tried to talk its way out of it to where they can't.
So you're saying the U.S. will if it looks like we're going to lose the hegemony position of top dog, we'll sooner start a war.
I'm saying I would hope we did. Heavy is the crown, and in order for us to maintain this quality of life that we have as Americans, right? And again, I am not a pro-war guy. Some people need killing, though. That's just the way it is. That's the way it will always be. War has solved more problems worldwide than any diplomatic solution you can imagine.
It's almost terrible that we haven't been. I mean, this is going to sound weird, but like it's in some ways bad that we haven't been able to have war because of nuclear weapons. We haven't been able to really sort out problems. So it's all happening on the periphery. I guess what I was trying to say before is, I do agree that I think a war is likely, just hopefully not inevitable.
Yeah. So again, not saying that this is, you know, hey, there's going to be North Koreans falling out of the sky here in a minute, grab your Red Dawn rifle and, you know, head to the mountains. Again, that can still happen. People think that we have these two bodies of water around us, and then somehow makes the United States, you know, uninvadable. The world is not that small anymore, right? You know, it would take us a while to mobilize all of our military capability to respond to something like that. Sure, we're going to shoot a bunch of shit down before it gets to us, but there could very well be landfall before we are ever able to respond militarily in its entirety. So, I mean, we're diving down into another topic that matters a whole lot to me, and that is the American populace's ownership of firearms and how ultimately that is its own deterrent to a certain perspective, but not really our scope here. I think that there is always and will be a possibility of shooting war with those top four, again, being a part of a portion of that shadow war. I see the things that take place behind the scenes, especially in the cyber domain. I see what's happening. I'm happy to say that I left that career because it is astounding just exactly how much is taking place that people aren't truly aware of.
The thing that really concerns me is when you look at the pre-positioning that the United States is doing, it's happening at a rate where it does suggest that the U.S. is ramping up and believes that China is going to have a war soon, because they're starting to pre-position stockpiles of weapons already in Australia and in the Philippines, and they're a little bit pushing it in Taiwan as well, and in Japan. And that's where they want to send their first multi-domain task force, is to Japan, actually, or Australia, they said. And that includes those mid-range Typhoon launchers that can fire up to like 1,500 kilometers away. And what they want to do is set up all these missile systems there already in place, because if we're not there before the war happens, we've already kind of lost. Yeah. So it's
again, that's why I say it almost from a preemptive perspective. There may come a time, and I probably believe this to be more the case than over the long term. I believe the more likely scenario is that the United States is the one to kick it off. If anything were to happen in the shorter term scenario, it's going to be a China-Taiwan thing. It's going to be, Russia deciding that they really just do want to launch a missile into Estonia, right? Something along those lines. In the shorter term, I can see, one of the big four being the catalyst. Probably Iran, to be honest with you. They kind of just made an example out of how they don't really care. But again, that's just my opinion, and it's also almost an opinion devoid of some of the nuance. Again, I don't look at things as simple as that either, right? I can see a world and a scenario where, as an eventuality, we just kind of continue to do this diplomatic dance and trade power position just forever. Again, I don't think that's likely, but I think there will definitely be another conventional war.
What do you think? I want to get your thoughts on, if you don't mind. I was wondering, there's a lot of talk about, so back, remember in like the 1980s and the first Cold War, really, it was about how communism is bad. Mm-hmm. And it's not really so much that now. What are your feelings on the whole like authoritarian kind of, all these authoritarian regimes? Do you feel like it's that's kind of what we're up against here, is that it's like democracy versus these authoritarians? Or how are you kind of seeing? Because like I think you're absolutely right. There's some people that just need killing, and that they have a very bad view of how the world should be run. I don't know. I kind of feel like I wouldn't want to live under a world order that is led by dictators.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there are plenty of people that have that same perspective. I get made fun of a lot because I never have both feet inside of one perspective. I think that comes from the intel background. A lot of my career is what's the enemy doing right now, so I'm thinking of two perspectives on it. I also see a lot of people that really don't give a shit if one other country is being run by an authoritarian or not. They just want to make sure that their freedoms to not be are preserved, right? So you'll have this portion of people that very much so want to ensure that everybody has the freedoms that we are supposed to enjoy, right? And then you'll have this other bucket of people that say that's what makes being an American great, and it's not my problem that they don't have those freedoms. But you are absolutely not wrong. There are authoritarian regimes that are taking over across the globe. You know, in 2021, we were all made aware of that with a girl dancing while a coup was happening behind her in Myanmar. Just covered that one.
I totally I relate to that because I do a lot of, I guess they call it like red cell thinking, where you put your kind of try to put yourself in the shoes of the adversary. And to me, that's some of the most interesting content that I like to produce is from that perspective. But I think sometimes people can see that and misunderstand that I'm maybe being sympathetic to them, but it's more like trying to understand them
enemy
in order to defeat them.
It's enemy COA analysis is what it is, right? So we'd always come up with your most deadly COA, your mid COA, and your mill COA, your most likely COA. And I look at a lot of problems that way too. Is what is the worst that could happen if, just going back to an earlier example, Russia takes Ukraine. Right, Ukraine's the breadbasket of the world, for example. Immediate boon to their economy, immediate boon to their military capability. How do you feel about what that does to the United States standing on the power balance? From that's a most likely COA. Were Russia to take Ukraine, the most deadly COA is that they are emboldened to push further. Right, obviously the most deadly COA being the most deadly potential outcome. The mid COA is typically the worst, but you can't not plan for it, right? You always plan for your mid COA and your mill COA. So I'm, again, it's got to do with my background that I always look at things from so many different perspectives. And I oftentimes in one day I can be called a Russian shill or a Russian bot. I can be called a Ukrainian simp. I've been called a Zionist in the last 24 hours. I've been called what was the other one? A statist. Yeah, but I was called that one.
I don't even know. I'm gonna have to Google it.
I think it has something to find out
what a status
like
is.
Generally being supportive of
glowy,
being supportive of like the state. I guess I don't know. I know what maybe statism is. I don't know.
Sounds like not a.
It sounds like bullshit.
They're not happy.
I don't care. It sounds like bullshit.
It can be frustrating sometimes because I don't double down on one side or another. And when you do, you really build a community of like-minded people, and it's very supportive, and everybody's, you're getting the claps, and it can feel nice, but I just have never, a little bit I have a sense of community, but also I've tried to build a community of people who, like, I know and I like to think, and I believe that there's a lot of people who are pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian that watch my videos because I try to just give it the straight skinny.
Objective review of information is different than a bias, right? You can be biased about a topic, but still relay or review information objectively. And that's something that, I watched an argument happen in our live chat one time of somebody trying to explain that to another person. And I didn't even comment on it, but it was actually a feel-good moment because it's something that I internalize quite a bit. Of course, I'm going to have my biases. We're human. Everybody will have them. If you say that you don't, you are ultimately, under most circumstances, when somebody says you're biased about this topic, what they're doing is they're exposing their own internal bias because they just want to see more of whatever their favorite belligerent is. So objective review of information is ultimately what the goal should be for people, right? Is this person reviewing this information objectively and giving it to me straight? People's internal bias matters, very little. Now, where it can ultimately impact you is the information that you ultimately end up reviewing. If that bulk of that information is, from one perspective and not another, you can objectively review it, but arrive to conclusions that are devoid of alternate perspectives. It's more complex than a for or against. Again, I think there are a lot of variables, and you can make an argument in just about every direction. One of the things I love doing with my wife is we'll take a position on something and then justify the alternate, right? And it's possible in just about every circumstance using small nuggets of information that are rooted in truth, right? Just about every piece of propaganda that you can imagine is going to be rooted in truth. Otherwise, it's not believable, right? You got to be able to point back to it. You got to source it. You know what I mean? So,
and you take kind of a hit because I'll say this: I've seen how it's could be way more profitable to just double down on one side.
Absolutely.
And if you have no kind of, I mean, I'm not saying that people who do that don't have integrity, but I'm saying it's difficult to not do that, because you can see the incentives for doubling down on one side or another has a lot of benefit. And it's one of the, probably, I would say probably the biggest problem in our media space is that though all of our platforms, all of them, be it X or Instagram or YouTube, they all have an incentive to double down on one side or another if you want to build an audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you build an audience if one video that you make shows something that is positive for what Russia wants, and then the next video it shows something that is positive for what Ukraine wants? It's very difficult, and there's only a very few amount of people can walk that line. It's very difficult. I'm saying with the way our platforms are set up, and the incentives that are built into them, it's a nightmare.
Well, that goes back into like the ultimate, in my opinion, the ultimate evil is social media algorithms. I think that everybody blames the other political party for the division. Everybody blames the foreign intelligence entities. They want to blame this or that. I maintain that social media algorithms are ultimately the bane of our existence, because they're designed to show you things in their extremities, and that's it. It's not going to show you the norm, right? Because people don't want to see the norm. Right. Remember the old saying, sex sells. You want to know why it sells? Because it is life in its most passionate. It is life in its extremity. So what you have with the algorithm is it's quite literally designed to perpetuate extremes.
It's
so
human nature.
What do you think it's going to perpetuate? The more of each individual extreme you watch, the more you are going to be shown things with that extreme as a primary lens.
Yeah.
And it gets to the point to where people don't even know anymore that they are in an echo chamber. I talk about my echo chamber all the time, right? I know that I'm in one because it's not possible to not be.
Yep.
By design of social media. So, there are things that I like that X is doing to try and remove that. I think that as an eventuality, the goal was that X was going to let the people, kind of moderate it via community notes, etc. I think it's taking a little bit longer for that to happen than I would have expected. There's some interesting takes that you end up coming across. But yeah, if I had, everybody points at them, like the other party, the other political party, and I'm like, well, you're seeing the most extreme perspective or the most extreme interpretation of that event on social media. That's not necessarily reflective of what's happening in real life, right? That's not reflective of, the conversation that you might be able to have in your community. When I have conversations about Ukraine or about, topics out at the grocery store or at church or wherever it is, they don't go the same way that I have them on social media.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's interesting. I think that you're absolutely right. X is the closest thing to kind of, there'll be a bunch of people that follow you that are one side and the other, kind of, at least
regardless of the topic too.
YouTube, I'm definitely in an echo chamber. It's, everyone that's there are people who like military stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's the subset, the demographic. Yeah. Very, very difficult to get out of that.
So I wanted to circle back to something, because I know that you were a part of, everybody's lens is always on, at least from a combat footage perspective here, right, is always on external, right? So we're always looking at footage of Russia. We're always looking at footage of, in Israel. And every so often we try to dive into topics about things that the United States is doing from a lessons learned perspective, right? So what is the United States doing, to improve or to be ready for whatever that next conflict is? You got a chance to shoot the new rifle. I need some details, man.
That I was very fortunate to have the opportunity that SIG contacted me and asked if I wanted to come check out the XM7. At the time, it was called...
SIG can contact me anytime they'd like.
Yeah. I think it was called the XM. It was the NGSW at the time.
Yeah.
And then the XM5, and then Colt was like, don't do that. Now it's the XM7. But when I fired it, I posted the video online on YouTube, and all the comments were like, wow, man, that manhandled you. That really took you for a ride. And it was a little bit embarrassing that I didn't fully handle it. But I've always said, I've always start the videos off with saying I'm an average infantryman. I'm not special forces. I'm not a crack shot. I shot sharpshooter, not marksman, but not expert either.
Nice.
Like, I wasn't the best soldier, but I wasn't the worst. And I mean, so what I'll say is, when I did that shoot with the XM7, what I've always wanted to do with the channel is to get, like, before I deployed to Iraq, I had always wished that I knew more about the military, the equipment, the geopolitics surrounding the conflict. I knew like nothing going in. I thought that they hated freedom. I literally thought that. Like, and I always thought, wouldn't it be better if maybe soldiers who are going and asked to fight in these wars knew a little bit more about the equipment that they had and about the culture of the places that they're being asked to go to? Because I would get and I'm sure you got these too, the like 6-hour-long briefings that were just dry. Like, here's what to expect when you go, when you deploy, you know, all those briefings that they put in. They're so dry and boring. And I have a theory that everyone in the military is like a middle child with ADD, and nobody's paying attention to those. They're falling asleep. And I'm so my mission with the channel has been to kind of help soldiers, or hopefully educate soldiers more on this stuff. And at the end of the day, I just want troops to get the best weapon possible, whether it's go back to the M4, HK416, or the XM7, whatever it is. I want them to get the best weapon. And what I think is interesting is I just put out a video titled "What Soldiers Think of the New XM7," and I went through all of the interviews that are publicly available with troops, and all of them are positive. Every interview, the soldiers, the grunts that are trialing it out are saying, this is amazing, love the firepower, it blows up concrete blocks from 600 meters away, it shoots through steel. And so that's what I'm seeing. And I even kind of suggest in the video at one point, I say, you know, these are all from Stars and Stripes. These are all your government agencies that are reporting this. So maybe they're not giving you the full story. This might not be all the feedback. Because I remember when I was given the XM320, the grenade launcher, I was one of the first soldiers to get that. And I remember thinking, this thing's a piece of crap. Like, at least it's annoying to have to put on the front of the rifle. It works great as a standalone. But that was just like my personal feedback on it. But I doubt Stars and Stripes would have published that. So after I published that video, I start getting a lot of messages from soldiers who are like, why are you cherry picking what I said? Or why are you only posting the good feedback?
Yikes.
And then I come to find out that the PAOs, the public affairs officers, are only publishing these guys' positive comments.
They hate it.
So at least some of them do.
Okay.
Some of them love it.
But you have to
I
look at
also
that.
got comments from people saying, dude, you nailed it. I love the rifle.
You have to look at that at a scale, though. Like, I mean, look at it across the force. If you're going to employ that across the force, and maybe if 30 of them, if your test body is 30 dudes, 30 soldiers, and you have 10 of them coming back to you saying, hey, no, that was actually absolute ass. That's 33% of the force that's going to be having an issue with that rifle.
So I felt terrible because I felt as though I didn't do my job. I didn't do the work that I didn't dig deep enough. I didn't reach out and hear from these people beforehand. And now I feel bad that like I didn't really investigate far enough, and I was kind of lazy and just pulled these quotes from online and thought that's the full story. And so I can understand if I was that soldier and I saw that I went and said that to a million people, like you love it, and then didn't say the rest of what you said. It doesn't matter if I knew it or not. Like, I feel like I let that soldier down because ultimately I just want them to get the best weapon they can. So yeah, that was a little bit of a learning experience for me because I just kind of took the Army a little bit at their word. And so the feedback, the specifics are that they didn't like that sometimes like the ammunition explodes and there's pieces of it that they've got photos in their hand.
Wait, like in the chamber it explodes, or it just kind of combusts? It just kind of blows up?
That when it comes out in pieces, which I don't know if that means what that means for the bullet, if it's unaccurate.
Well, it's a bimetal casing.
So does it matter if it pulls apart afterwards? I don't know.
So the casing with the 6.8x5.1 is bimetal, which is the only way that you can have 80,000 psi of pressure in there. That's insane.
It's gas.
It's actually insane. But the only way to support that, there was an interview. Somebody delivered this interview where they were talking about it was a general of some kind. They were talking about the new weapon system, and they were like, look, the gun doesn't matter. Like the gun is the delivery mechanism of the new technology, which is the 6.8x5.1, the 277 Fury, and this bimetal, the top of it's like brass or something, and then the bottom of it is a different metal. I don't know the specifics on it. But if they're talking about like that bimetal casing, the bottom portion of it separating from the upper portion of it, I feel like that kind of makes sense to an extent. But if it's like in the chamber, the pressures are so high, it's like disintegrating the casing or something. That's wild.
My understanding of what they were saying was that after it ejects, it's in pieces. And I'll send you the Reddit post. The guy put a really great rundown on all the things that were wrong with it. Cause he did have like one positive. He liked that it was powerful and that it blows.
It looks like
up.
It kicks your ass.
Yeah, but he what was the main thing that he had a problem with was they didn't like the weight of it. They didn't like that even with that extra power, it's still not punching through some of our steel targets, which our steel targets might be a good stand-in for what body armor is. I don't know. But they also don't like the accuracy sometimes. He was saying that it would like throw every third shot. The MOA, he was saying it was between, I believe he said it was a 2.83, 1.83. So he said it would shoot groupings of about 2.8, and then like every once in a while it would throw one kind of from the gassing.
That's interesting.
And so my understanding is that the M4, M16 military versions are around MOA of 4, and that these are meant to be within 4, but that even that is some soldiers are unhappy with that, especially I guess at distance. So I guess there's also a lot of these troops feel like the Army's not going to invest the time and money and the resources needed to train soldiers to take advantage of this round and optic that is supposed to hit out to 700-800 meters. So whether they're right or wrong in their critiques, it's really the thing that fascinates me is just like, if I was the Army, I guess I shouldn't be surprised because they did the same thing with the M16. When the M16 first came out, I think they tried to kind of tamp down on what the criticisms were, but it's a little disappointing that they're sending these rifles out to the troops and then they're like, hey, what's your feedback? And then they're they're
reshaping that feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, don't even publish anything then. Just say, hey, we're still testing this.
So I've got a buddy that has been a part of the testing cycle for that in the past, and the feedback that he shared was that the rifle just kicks your ass. Like so don't feel bad. Like he's a stout dude, and that thing was kicking him around. But that the machine gun was sweet. He was saying that was, he had a lot more fun firing the machine gun. I just want to get my hands on one, just to shoot it. But I don't want the civilian one, right? So I want the bimetal case. I want the whole package because again, I just can't think of who did that interview. He was specifically said the rifle is solely here to deliver the new technology, which is the 6.8x51. That being said, I mean, I've heard the rumors of it having a hard time defeating armor, which was one of the stated requirements of the new program is they needed to defeat armor. They needed to do it at a further distance, right? It kind of aligns with the Army's shift of its marksmanship training. I'm still dealing with that. I'm still teaching that, right? We shifted off of the old 40 point. It's still 40 points, but you're now doing magazine changes. You got to fight up on the VTAC barrier. It feels like we are trying to increase the baseline capability of the force, and I'm wondering what else is happening in that same respect, like across NATO. Like, are we the only ones trying to modernize all the way down to the individual? Does that make sense?
Yeah, NATO and all the allied countries are looking at what the U.S. Army is doing, and they're waiting. They're waiting to see, does this new concept work? Which is that we're kind of going back to the battle rifle that we had in the Cold War, the FNFAL. We used to have the 30-06. We had that powerful battle rifle, right? In World War II, we had that big caliber, but we realized that it was overkill. And the reason it didn't make sense back then was most engagements were around 300 meters. But now, with the advent of the proliferation of optics, we can now take advantage of that. This is the theory. We can now take advantage of that full-powered rifle. So in theory, like you said, we will now be able to hit out to 600-700 meters instead of going and kicking in doors and clearing rooms in CQB style. The theory is that in a great power war, we would just be flattening those buildings. We would just be blowing that up. And
sounds like the best way to do CQB is to just blow it up.
I mean, why waste time doing that? Like, that's what a tank is for, just flat level it. And so, I mean, you know, if we're thinking this isn't a counterinsurgency war we're fighting against China or Russia in theory. So the XM7, it's very interesting. It's like you said, it's a system. To understand its value, we need to look at it as not just this rifle that kicks like a mule. It's also this machine gun that is orders of magnitude better than the SAW. I fired it. It feels like a dream because it's got this recoil mitigation system where it kind of just the recoil impulse feels like someone's just pushing on your shoulder directly, one push instead of like ta 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 ta. And the accuracy of the XM250 is supposed to be, I think the SAW's 12 minute of angle. And I don't know what this one is. I don't know if they released it yet, but it's supposed to be way more accurate. So in theory,
the beaten zone is just going to shrink.
Right. You know? Yes. And that's the highest casualty producing weapon. So like you said, it's all about the ammo and it's about I think it's also about this machine gun. And so, yeah, maybe you have less volume of fire with your higher recoil, lower capacity magazine XM7, but that's made up for with this machine gun that is just, it's also, I believe, 5 pounds lighter than the SAW. So it's way lighter, way more powerful, way more accurate. For everything that you hear negative about the rifle, you don't hear any complaints about the machine gun. The
machine gun, yeah. So that's the way I've always kind of looked at the program in its entirety, is I see what we're trying to do systemically to kind of adapt the force to adopt a higher marksmanship standard, ultimately making the lethality of the individual higher. I think a lot of the detractors, until you get into some of the specifics, which I don't have of the ammo, right? There are some that are saying that the 6.8x51 is not the capability that they thought it was going to be. So that's like a separate discussion. But a lot of people will point at, you know, the recoil for the average infantryman, right? Which the average infantryman is not, you know, always going to be this just big muscular, you know, hulk of a dude. You know, they're just normal dudes. Yeah, and there in a lot of, you know, circumstances they're in shape, but from an accuracy perspective, I see the changes that the Army's making to the marksmanship program. You know, I see the changes to the way we're treating the individual marksman. Right, there are changes that are even happening all the way down in like the reserve and National Guard level with how we train. I see it more as a systemic change with than I do just as an individual rifle switch, right? Which I think some people look at it at its face value, that it's just moving to a new rifle based on the same way we've always done things. And I don't see it that way. I see us moving to this new rifle that we use as an output of these other doctrinal changes that we're making to training and how we employ that rifle. And that's why I think there's still some likelihood that it might be a good thing. You know, I got to get my hands on one. I want to shoot it like really bad. I can still understand the argument of carrying it though, right?
The rifle, I think the civilian version is pretty similar to the military one. I think you'll really get the same feel, I think. Yeah. That's my understanding. Like the 227, I believe it's the same recoil.
Yeah.
Because the difference in The rounds is really just what I've read or what I've talked to some experts is that it's just the bullet that's different. So you're going to get the same recoil.
Is it still the same chamber pressures though?
Yes, that's what I
So the 277 Fury is going to have the same chamber pressures as the military round.
I spoke to somebody who works at SIG.
Okay.
I can't say who, but they said this is what they said. Maybe they're wrong. I don't know. But they said that it's always going to be the same chamber pressure, and that the difference between the training round and the special purpose round is the bullet itself. That's what determines. That's what he said. But yeah, I'll ask SIG. I doubt they won't even let me shoot it anymore. So I don't know what I could do.
Well, I haven't shot it yet, SIG.
I think a lot of people, there's a tendency to look at it like you said. They're looking at it like this is a rifle that they're going to shoot for home defense or something, and they want to know its specifications for a rifle as just a concept. It's a rifle. No, it's a system. It's part of this doctrinal change, and it might only make sense for how we plan to fight. What one army uses and does might not make sense for another. And for the way the army, the thing that fascinates me about procurement and military weapon systems is that it's essentially trying to read the future. You're trying to predict the future. And the army is essentially looking into their crystal ball and saying that they believe the future of warfare is going to require greater power and greater distance. And if they're wrong, that would really suck. Like if World War III actually ends up taking place in trenches and in urban terrain, and it's just like the worst conditions for the XM7, hypothetically, let's say that it ends up being bad, like that would be terrible, and they'd have to just reverse course. But they imagine a situation where the U.S. Army is outnumbered 2-1. And how do you make up for that disadvantage? Well, you make up for it with a way more powerful rifle that can outrange
Some would
them.
make the argument that you'd make up for it with way more ammo, though. Right?
That's a good argument.
So, I mean, again, going back to seeing multiple perspectives on this, I can see the argument in both directions. Is that, I've never met an infantryman, but you're happy to correct me. I've never met an infantryman that has told me that less ammo was better.
And you will carry 30% less ammo with this.
Yeah. But
So
I can also
very good point.
I can also see the argument that, effectively you just sit back a little bit further than your adversary's capabilities and turn it into a turkey shoot. Because again, systemically, you are increasing the baseline capabilities of the force to hit at those distances.
Yeah, China's QBZ 191, I think it fires if it's not a 545, it's like their version of a 556, 545. Yeah. So what does that have a range of? Like 300 meters, 400 meters?
It's going to be somewhere between 300 and 500 meters point target. It's very similar to the 556.
Yeah. So
unless it keyholes at 10 meters like that video showed us.
I know, yeah. That is a mystery still. But yeah, like the 6.8, they claim that it's at least 7.8, right? So I can see where their head's at. Like you'll be able to shoot them 300 meters before they can shoot you. And the reason I think it might be interesting is because anytime you increase the range of any weapon system, whether it's missiles or guns or whatever, it depends on your sensors being able to go out to that range. People forget this, but like you can only hit something if you can see it. So I don't even think we're going to be seeing these targets 800 meters away thanks to this optic. I don't think that's going to be it. It's going to be because every squad is going to have a drone. And so
I would hope so.
Yeah. So you're going to be seeing your targets 800 meters out because you're going to have a drone that you deployed and has a thermal camera. And so you can see it and then you can shoot it because of these drones. That the XM7 is only, I think, going to make sense in terms of we now have sensor capabilities that can reach out 800 meters for organic to this squad.
The necessity to employ not only the drone, both lethal and non-lethal. So lethal in exploding drones, robot birds, as well as from almost an ISR perspective, so a collection perspective, basically needs to be dual capability, almost down to the teen level, right? Because that's what we're seeing as generally speaking effective in Ukraine right now, is that you have this new capability, this nuanced capability that's been pushed down to almost the lowest fighting level. And it is ingrained as a part of, how they're waging war. In fact, there was a story, I'm not sure if you've even heard this, but there was a story of some scouts from the 47th ahead of the Ukrainian counteroffensive that had come to Germany to receive some training, again, ahead of the counteroffensive, and they wanted to use their drones as a part of the training. And I remember talking about this at the time. The, training cadre, Americans, told them, no, we're doing this all with, map and compass, and you're going to yourself, go do the scout activity. That was kind of jarring to me because we were over a year into the war and we had seen this kind of capability adapt and change the battle space for so long. It made me wonder, how much the United States is truly. Of course, you'll always have those like, look at we're doing it. But it made me wonder truly how much we are incorporating that from a capability perspective in the next war's plan. You know what I mean?
I think at that time, probably not very well, but I think that it has changed, at least in the Marine Corps. I did a couple of interviews with this group in the Marines called MAGTAF. It's the Marine Air and Ground Force, I think it stands for. It's whatever that acronym stands for. But basically, they're putting an enormous amount of thought into how do we coordinate with drones? How do we integrate drones at every level, not just how we use them, but also how we counter them.
Yeah, drone defeat as well.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, so they have entire teams working on it now and integrating it and fast tracking the capabilities into the platoons. But at that point, that you're talking, I know what you're talking about, but kind of was like before the counteroffensive when they were trying to train them. Yeah, that was a disappointing thing that got leaked out. Yeah. I don't know about the Army though. I'd be curious because the Army's a much bigger beast than the Marines. The Marines can adapt quicker, I feel. So I don't know how big Army is doing.
So again, I've put some content around this before, primarily on the live show, which is always hard to refer somebody back to. Like if it was all edited breakdowns of this stuff, I'd be able to point back to a video. But it was a live show that I went through a couple capabilities the Army is developing. And it's almost it's a lot like a defense in depth perspective from anti-air, right? You've got your permanent, you've got your semi-permanent, mobile, and then you have your man-pack type solutions. So multiple bubbles, all the way down to a kinetic solution on an M4, where it was shown to be, I don't remember the percentage of effectiveness, but basically effective at being able to fire for you once you paint the drone. Right. So from the danglers, that are just kind of hovering, if you will, those, this optic on the M4 that was firing for you, as long as you got the gun up on it, it would take the shot when it knew it was going to hit. But then moving up, into electronic warfare, from there were man packs that they were developing all the way up the chain. There are other capabilities that some of the dudes on the ground have talked about, to me privately, that are being, I can't say they're being tested. I don't think that's the case. It's not that I'm not saying that because it's secret. There are other capabilities that we have that are a bit more broad that can help in a larger scale that still have yet to come to light though, right? The rest of that is where I don't know what I can and can't say. He shared it with me, so it's probably to a certain extent okay. I just know that there are more capabilities that are being developed, but what I can't tell is whether or not that's being done in a vacuum or if it is being done as this more broad effort of incorporation, right? Is it like a tiger team? They're like, yes, you guys are our drone guys. And then you just kind of set them in a corner and then go back to your normal planning cycles.
That's what they're, at least in the Marines, that's what they're trying to figure out is how do we organize this? Is it a separate team? Like in Ukraine, they have the separate FPV drone teams, and they kind of work in collaboration with the infantry units. And is that what you're talking about? Like, how is it organized out? Because it is interesting. Where does it fall?
Yeah, well,
battalion level.
That's what I
company
mean.
level?
Is how we have a structure that we have been operating off of, and in the Army, right? You have a mission command. How everything flows down from the commander and how you ultimately execute across all the different functions. Where does drone fall? Right? Is it just an infantry thing? Is it, do you have a drone team that's attached to, is the intel guy the one that's flying it, or is the 13 Fox the guy that's flying it, right? That your forward observer. Where does the function fall? Because again, you can look at multiple jobs that it as a capability is removing. It's removing the 13 Fox role, forward observer. It can call for fires. It's removing a sniper's job. Because you can fly it into a building and turn it and do this with it until it hits. Where does the capability fall?
What MOS is it? Is it 11
that's
Bravo?
kind of my
is it
point.
17 Echo? And that makes a big difference because
is it a combat MOS?
So you remember when we had the Stryker MGS? It was the mobile gun system. It was kind of a light tank. It was the Stryker with this giant 105 millimeter cannon on it, and that was run by infantrymen. That 11 Bravos are using that. It's kind of like a light tank. And now the M10 Booker is 19 kilos. It's tanker guys who go to school for tankers. And so, is this drone systems, are they going to be 11 Bravos that it's just kind of like here? Or is it a recon section? Like how recon sections are separate from the regular platoon? Is the drone team going to be that? These are the questions that they have to work out. And I don't know if they're doing that, how fast they're doing that. Or I would assume that they're looking at how Ukraine is running it. Mm-hmm. That is the stuff that it seems to be classified, because I've asked those questions and they won't give me those answers around those specific questions.
I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. Is the Bradley a tank?
It's one of those mysteries.
No. This one is one of those ones where we're going to arrive at a yes or no from you.
Well, it's an infantry fighting vehicle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, according to the Oxford Dictionary, it meets every definition of a tank. Right? I'm not saying that it needs to be a main battle tank. Just saying, if it came rolling over the hills in World War II, what would people call it? That's an infantry fighting vehicle. That's a tank.
Yeah. I guess it depends how you want to define it ultimately. I think it meets the qualifications for a tank because it has, to me, you can make a very good argument that anything with tracks and armor is a tank ultimately.
Yeah, sure.
Even if it's self-propelled artillery, you could make the argument that that's a tank.
You don't, because you could,
with a lot of self-propelled artillery, you could lower the cannon and fire it, and then what is it? It's a tank.
What's that one that I posted last night? I posted one of it's like a 105 millimeter system on the back of a Humvee, and it was dope. And I've got to get my hands on it.
The Hawkeye.
Yes.
Yeah, it's got the soft recoil.
Tank? Is that a tank?
Well, I don't think that it would qualify as a tank.
Why?
Because I think you need tracks and heavy armor. I think that's the at its most base sense, a tank.
What is a tank?
Right? It's armor and tracks, I think.
We're gonna make a documentary called "What is a Tank?"
Yeah. It'll play nationwide. It'll trigger people. If you really want to trigger people to that conversation, even the M10 Booker, they're calling not a tank. You heard about all that? That it's not a.
That's a tank.
But I do get what they're going for. I get what their argument is, that if they want to call it a mobile protected firepower, so that people get used to that it's not supposed to be used as a tank. I get what they're going for.
What does it mean by used as a tank?
Well, because
used as a main battle tank, yeah, I get it, but it's still a tank.
I think they're trying to. It almost says to me that they don't trust that soldiers are smart enough to understand.
Of course.
Hey guys, don't use this M10 Booker to go up against tanks necessarily.
Somebody's gonna W key that. I'm telling you, man. They don't trust us because they can't.
Right. Yeah.
Simply they can't. Brother, we've got to get ready for our live show tonight.
Yeah.
So again, thanks for all this conversation and for coming all the way out here. And You know, we're going to have to hold somebody accountable to the shitty PMCS job on that Vic that got dispatched that shouldn't have because it was deadline. But I appreciate you, dude.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate you including me in the operation that you have going down here, and I thank you so much.
It's just my house, dog.
Thank you for inviting me into your home. That means almost more.
I just wanted us to have enough time to have a beer before the live show.
Perfect. I would be 100% down with that.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah, thank you, Ronnie.